As many of us will recall, on October 29th, 2012, Superstorm Sandy made landfall in my part of the United States. Its impact up and down the East Coast were devastating and heartbreaking. New York, New Jersey, parts of New England were hit particularly hard. In Delaware, we did not experience the level of devastation that was inflicted on our neighbors to the north and to the east, but our state did receive significant damage. In total, there were over 200 deaths attributed to Superstorm Sandy. And today, we remember the lives lost and those forever impacted by this storm. As I traveled through Delaware during and after the storm, I saw some of the massive impacts of that storm firsthand. But I saw something else as well. I saw people from all walks of life pulling together, helping one another, and taking care of their neighbors. The impacts of that superstorm are still fresh in my mind today as we continue to rebuild in Delaware, New Jersey, in New York, and other places up the East Coast. But not only are the impacts of the superstorm still fresh in my mind, something else is as well. And that is this: the extraordinary efforts of ordinary people who left the comfort of their own homes in Delaware, in Maryland, in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, and other states as well. And they left their homes to help people they had never met and would probably never see again. And they did it not because they were paid to do it, not because someone told them to do it, because they wanted to do it. This morning I met a handful of Delawareans who were called to action by the Red Cross to volunteer in the shelters and communities in Delaware, in New Jersey, and New York. Those volunteers, including Charlotte and Richard Duffy, Joe Miller, and Glenn Shiley, are joining us today in the Senate chamber, and we welcome them. In the days and weeks following Sandy, they stopped their lives to help others. And for that, we are truly grateful. I want to thank you all for your extraordinary service. As our rebuilding efforts continue, I'm so thankful for the first responders, for the volunteers, for the Good Samaritans who pulled together not only in Delaware, but in our states to the north to ensure the safety and health of our neighbors. A few minutes ago, I told the folks who gathered in my office for just some light refreshments before we came over here. I said to the group that's joining us here today in the chamber that last night I'd heard a speech from Paul Begala. Paul Begala, our presiding officer, remember, had been a key member of President Clinton's team during his presidency. He's been on television a million times and sort of widely known for his wit. And we saw another side of Paul Begala last night. We saw his wit as well. But we also heard from them a recounting, a retelling of the story in the Old Testament of the first question that was asked in the Bible. And he asked the audience, he said, who asked the first question? Nobody knew. And he said, actually, the question was asked by Abel, who had slain his brother Cain. And the Heavenly Father knew what had happened, looked up, tracked down Abel, and he said, where's Cain? And Cain said, am I my brother's keeper? Am I my brother's keeper? And that story is retold in the Bible in a number of places as the golden rule, to look out for, help other people the way we'd like to be helped, to treat other people the way we'd want to be treated. And not only does that show up in the Old Testament and the New Testament, including the parable of the Good Samaritan, but it shows up in the sacred scripture. If you happen to be Jewish, you happen to be Christian, you happen to be Muslim, you happen to be Buddhist, Hindu, it shows up in the sacred scriptures of virtually every major religion on earth. The idea that we have an obligation to help our neighbors, whoever they might be. And in the New Testament, the parable in the New Testament, Jesus is asked by some of the Pharisees, who is my neighbor? And that's when he tells the story of the Good Samaritan, who ultimately was helped not by someone from his community, not by a clergyman who walked by, but was helped by somebody from another part of that country that didn't care at all for the fellow that was beaten and left for dead. The financial cost of Superstorm Sandy were also severe and estimated to be in the not just hundreds of millions of dollars, but billions of dollars. It will take years to recover from devastation like this. And as my colleagues and I know, it is important that we get that recovery right. I want us to take a look at a few pictures of Seaside Heights, New Jersey before Sandy and after. And before I turn to the photographs on my left here, I would just say to the presiding officer, a lot of people who might be watching this across the country on C-SPAN are wondering, where is Seaside Heights, New Jersey? I wonder that myself. I'm from Delaware. We're less than 100 miles away. And a lot of people have heard of Asbury Park, where Bruce Springsteen is from. And Asbury Park is just a little bit north of Seaside Heights, New Jersey. And about 50 miles south of Seaside Heights is a place called Atlantic City that a lot of us have heard of. Well, this is a shot taken in May of 2009 in Seaside Heights, New Jersey. This is a before shot. This was about roughly 3 years, a little more than 3 years before the hurricane. And a couple of buildings here. We have these yellow arrows right here, and they're there for a purpose so that when we look at the after shot, we'll kind of figure out what happened to those structures. Here's a red arrow right here on this building right here. And this is about 3.5 years later when Sandy came a-calling. Here we go. These buildings aren't in the same place. They don't look alike. They don't look the same. What looked to have been a pier along through here is gone. There used to be roads through here, and now there are what appear to be sandy trails. And virtually every house here is badly damaged. Many of them absolutely, totally destroyed. And we have another shot here. Same town, Seaside Heights. This is obviously the beach, the boardwalk, and this is an amusement park. And a lot of people went there over the years, had a great time, families for decades. And they had a roller coaster here. They had a lot of rides here. I don't know about the rest of you, I like rides. My wife says, are you ever going to grow up? And I say, I hope not, because this sounds still fun to me. But there's a roller coaster here. And we're going to take a look. This was taken, again, late May 2009. There's the roller coaster. Let's just see what it looks like right after Hurricane Sandy. Thank you. Here's the roller coaster. Here's the roller coaster. It's in the ocean. And here's what's left of the pier and of the amusement park. And the power of that storm is, I think, demonstrated graphically by these photos, which I said earlier, that storm which took the lives, not just destroyed this amusement park, not just destroyed the beaches, the homes, and this one town, but wreaked havoc throughout the mid-Atlantic and northeastern seaboard and took the lives of over 200 people. In the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, we saw many problems during the recovery phase that held communities back and created great suffering. And not only great suffering, a lot of anger in terms of the inadequate response, the untimely response, the inept response. But money was not always well spent. The efforts were not well coordinated. The recovery moved slowly as a result. Thanks in part to the post-Katrina Emergency Management Reform Act of 2006, which was shepherded through our committee, Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee, through Congress by Senators Susan Collins and Joe Lieberman, many of the problems that we saw during Katrina's recovery efforts have been fixed, and we've seen a great deal of improvement in our emergency response efforts as a result. I'd like to say I have a friend of mine who you ask him, you say, how are you doing? And he always says, well, compared to what? Well, when you say, how are we doing with respect to the recovery after Superstorm Sandy? Well, compared to what? Compared to Katrina, we're doing great. Can we do better? You bet we can. But we've learned a lot, and 7 years later, you can tell we have learned not all of our lessons, but certainly a number of them. But that act that was passed about a year ago required FEMA to bolster over a year, about half dozen years ago. That act required FEMA to bolster their regional offices in order to build strong relationships with state, local, and tribal governments. As an old governor, recovering lieutenant governor presiding up here, we know that federal government can't do everything, and particularly in responding to emergencies, that's that relationship with the state, with the local folks, in some cases with tribal units, with the emergency responders, the National Guard, all the above is critical. But those strong relationships have not only improved the ability of the federal government to respond to disasters, they've also enhanced FEMA's capability to support state, local, and tribal governments as they rebuild. That law also required FEMA to coordinate with other federal departments to write a national disaster recovery strategy. This eventually led to the National Disaster Recovery Framework, which has helped organize and coordinate recovery efforts to Hurricane Sandy. A key question we need to ask, though, after a storm like this is whether it was an aberration or a harbinger of things to come. I'd like to think it was an aberration. There's a good chance it was not. Just a few short years ago, hurricanes hitting areas along the northeastern half of the East Coast were relatively uncommon. Hurricane Sandy is actually the third major hurricane to threaten or strike the northeastern coast of our country in the last 3 years. Unfortunately, we're almost through this hurricane season, knock on wood, without a major storm hitting our coast. Unfortunately, the Northeast, Mid-Atlantic, and other vulnerable areas are expected to see more frequent and larger storms like Sandy in the future. Earlier this year, the Government Accountability Office, affectionately known as GAO, added a new area to its recently updated high-risk list: the impact of climate change on the federal government and on our country. GAO explained that, among other things, climate change, this is a quote, could threaten coastal areas with rising sea levels, alter agricultural productivity, and increase the intensity and frequency of severe weather events, close quote. GAO also argued that the federal government is not prepared to deal with the impacts of climate change. I might add state governments as well, and local governments, but not prepared to deal with the impacts of climate change, and recommended that we take a strategic look at them and start to prepare accordingly. Mr. President, the costs associated with responding to and recovering from a hurricane like Sandy, both the human and financial costs, are so severe that we simply cannot afford to face this devastation over and over and over again. I think it might have been Einstein who defined what is the definition of insanity? Is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different result. We can't do the same thing over and over and again. It's a different world in which we live, and we have to respond to those changes. Well, fortunately, we've seen some states take promising steps toward addressing some of the issues that GAO has identified. In particular, the states of New York and New Jersey have begun to plan to mitigate against future disasters. We know all too well that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. In fact, a few years ago, the National Institute of Building Sciences issued a report that concluded that for every dollar that we spend on various mitigation measures, we can save $4 in response and recovery costs. For a $1 investment, we end up saving $4. Through mitigation, then, we can get better results, save money, and most importantly, we can save lives. We must ensure that sound and effective mitigation policies are thoroughly incorporated into this recovery effort. This is especially important as climate change drives the sea level to rise and increases the severity and frequency of coastal storms. By working together, we can rebuild and become stronger by better protecting ourselves from future storms. But in doing so, we can't ignore what I believe and what many experts believe that may be the underlying cause of storms like Hurricane Sandy. It's not enough to just address the symptom, and that is the storm, the wind, the sea level rise, the surge. We need to address the underlying cause or causes. And as we recover from Sandy and put into place the protections, we need to reduce the impact of the next big one. We'd be making a mistake if we didn't think about what we need to do to address not just the symptoms of climate change, but the underlying cause and causes itself. Mr. President, we've been joined on the floor by my colleague, Senator Menendez from New Jersey, And Senator, my colleague, I think I should say this through the presiding officer, but we have some folks that are here today from Delaware who ended up, as I said earlier, in New Jersey, and I think in New York. Our state was hit nothing like your state, but our folks served in the spirit of the Good Samaritan with the encouragement and actually the organizational skills of the Red Cross, came to your state, across that Delaware River, and in order to lend a hand to people who didn't know, had never met, would probably never see again. And someday the tables will be turned. Someday it'll be our state. Someday it'll be Delmarva that's reeling from the impact of a storm like that. And we know that when that happens, you'll be there for us as well. And with that, Mr. President, I'm pleased to yield the floor to my friend from New Jersey. Thanks so much.